Hi, this is Privateer Station, and today we bring you day 530 of Russian invasion into Ukraine. As always, with former advisor to the office of the President of Ukraine, Lieutenant Colonel Olexiy Arestovych, and Russian opposition politician, lawyer, and blogger Mark Feygin. Enjoy. Dear friends, glad to see you all once again. Sorry, sometimes it happens. Our stream interrupted and our day is a bit discombobulated today. I'm on the road and we do have to deal with a lot of technical issues. Now it's 10 o'clock, 10 minutes past 10 in Kiev and Moscow, and we're doing our usual stream with Olexiy Arestovych. Good evening again. If we'll get disconnected again, we'll come back once again, and so until morning, right? Not sure if we can go for that heroics, Olexiy, but let's still try it once again. Let's talk about the results of Jeddah summit and the results that were announced at the end of it, and what was commented upon by Moscow. That Moscow returns to the earlier demands, basically not leaving them. What's here? So the main contradiction here is that all participants of Jeddah actually supported territorial integrity of Ukraine, including China and including Iran, which Moscow thought might be different vote. The only thing that was noted by advisor to the president, Yermak, he said that the only disagreement was about the compensation by Russia to Ukraine at the end of war and punishment of military criminals. These things need more definition, but as for territorial integrity, everybody affirmed that. And that goes as a contradiction to the terms of Moscow, which managed to rewrite its constitution and say that now they own 4 territories of Ukraine. And here they're being awaited by a surprise of their life. And Summit supported 2 things. First, that different countries, the bucket of those was very not simple. There are a lot of serious European countries, leading countries, including China, United States, but also there are countries of the global south, which Moscow was so intent on bending to their group. And many people are talking that about the fact that China and Iran are already taking the side of winners and want to participate in sharing that pie, which Russia is. I wouldn't really peddle this topic in this light, but I would say they definitely are not in voting in Russian favor. And they're making decisions in their own interest, and it just outlines that Moscow finds themselves more and more in the international isolation. And now even major, what Russia was thinking to be allies, China and India said, no, territorial integrity is to remain for Ukraine. There was somewhere in the news in America a publication that Kiev doesn't insist upon Russia withdrawing all their troops. I do not believe that, but we'll see. We'll see, and the summit generally surprised me with the variety of countries participating. And it's great that international players reaffirm the principle of territorial integrity. This is wonderful. And participation of China surprised me too. By the way, a statement was made by Foreign Affairs Minister of Iran, who's saying they're not supplying any arms to Russia, including drones. I wouldn't believe that fully, but it's pretty symptomatic that they start talking about it, saying, no, we have nothing to do with them. Okay, so the next question is, what next? Because Moscow, how much do you think they can ignore it, even being in such isolation in their current relations with Iran, China, and Saudi Arabia? What other levers do they have? Well, there is a thing called public official position, which will be reflected in other places after the summit, for example, in United Nations. And this is also a step to the global peace forum that Ukraine is trying to assemble in autumn, where Zelensky's formula for peace will be more actively suggested, and there'll be more countries, and voting will be wider. But Moscow found themselves in a difficult place already. And frankly, they would need to say that they're against the principle of territorial integrity, right? They are facing the surprise in the future when the United Nations will reaffirm territorial integrity once again. If they didn't know, war as such for territorial gains was prohibited since the Second World War. United Nations declared wars to be a crime against humanity by itself, and all except one wars after that were done under the banner of special operation. And this is important. Even though the effectivity of United Nations is low, a lot of things depend on it, and the votes there, including the Security Council and General Assembly, it is important for us. We need that, and it means growing isolation of Moscow, not immediate, but a growing one. And it will start limiting their resources and ways to wiggle, even through great schemes. It's a long process. Diplomatic counteroffensive is not much easier than military counteroffensive, if to judge by the efforts exerted. And it needs to be done, needs to be carried out, but this was a great element of it. Alright, so the second stage that supposedly is announced is going to happen on the level of leaders of different countries. Right, this one is being prepared for autumn. There is no exact date yet, but it will be a very serious event. There will be a lot of countries, and they will be represented by their leaders. And it will be a fundamental one in making decision about the possible ways out of this conflict and reforming the security system in Europe and wider in the global world. This is an interesting suggestion by Ukraine. One of the few possible positive outcomes of this war is to update the security system in the world and ways countries can react to aggressors. All right, we have about 100,000 watching us, and 34,000 for some reason clicked the like button. Oh, wait. Yeah, we need to make a statement. Do not click the like button and do not subscribe to our channels. Just, disconnect and do not click bell. All right. Zelensky, in his interview, made important statements that Russia will likely be left without vessels if they continue to with their naval blockade of Ukraine. Zelensky says that Ukraine does not need Russian territory, however, and is not going to capture anything. So, 1 and 2. There are other elements and theses there. How can you comment on that? Well, one vessel is one drone, so it's not too big of a problem to leave Russia without their vessels and organize different other sea issues for Russia. We already showed that we can play this game as well, and we'll continue playing it until they understand that it hurts. And second, about the territory of Russia, oh, that's for sure, we do not need Russian territory. And by the way, President made another good point. We have nowhere to retreat. We are on our land. Russians do have. Alright, so then how do you look at the operations and raids that Russian Volunteer Corps and Liberty of Russia group are doing? Mark, these are activities and actions carried out by Russian citizens who are fighting against Putin's regime. And they're not capturing territory for Ukraine. They're not including that into Ukraine constitution, unlike Russia was doing to the occupied territories. You can do raids during the war terms as far as Vladivostok if you want to. Nowhere in the world you can find a regulation that the war needs to be conducted only on the territory of victim. No, the war needs to expand to the territory of aggressor. But we are not aiming to take any territory from Russia. We aim to destroy their military capability in order to make sure they cannot attack us again, and we don't need their territory. Okay, before map, there is one more news. President of South Africa invited presidents of 67 countries, 34 countries confirmed their presence. And by the way, they did not invite Macron. This is for CST summit. Oh no, sorry, this is for BRICS summit. And yeah, I think Macron tried to get there, but he was not allowed to. And as for representation, Russia will be probably represented by Lavrov, by Foreign Affairs Minister. Mark, we'll see what decisions will BRICS be making. And Brazil is one of the countries against the expansion of BRICS at the moment. And even though President of Brasilia wants to pose that question differently, basically playing into Russian hands, trying to make peace on the Russian terms. And he's eager to make peace with Russia and Ukraine by making Ukraine to do all the concessions, but he's not ready to accept more countries into BRICS. That's interesting. Well, speaking of France and Macron, you think it's because the events in Niger? Well, yeah, they don't want to listen to things that he might have brought to that summit about the good order in Africa and other decisions that need to be made. But probably they don't want to hear that. And the actions in this group probably will need to be organized more during consulting, because French post-colonial system is somewhat ending its days in Africa. They're being kicked out of the third country in Africa, and China and Russia are actually being more active in that continent. So they don't. Why would they want to have France on that platform? Why would they want French influence to return, even in the form of statement by Macron on BRICS summit? They don't need that, and it's understandable why Macron will not go there. And I think they thought about it during their first request to come visit BRICS summit. French foreign politics looks very helpless in light of that. Yeah, that's true. All right, let's take a look at the map and see what's happening there. We've been live for about 12 minutes. All right, well, let's take a look at deep state map. We have no advance by enemy on Kupiansk-Kremenная line. Their attempts to continue acting there and continue pushing, but without any results. Second, same fighting happening around Bakhmut, to the south of Bakhmut especially. We hear Russians screaming that we already are in Klashchiivka, and Andreevka and Kurdyumovka are already technically in the gray zone already, with partial infiltration by our troops to both settlements or fights on the outskirts. Avdiivka still holds. They cannot do anything in that fortified region. On the south, near Vuhledar, we have some important fights happening. That's at 3 o'clock on this map, that little blue line. But it's too early to mark too much of an advancement there. But as for our favorite direction, Велика Новоселка, Staramlinovka, there we can say that Russians are screaming that Ukrainian troops are already in Urozhaina, which supposedly to be fortified, and these damn Ukrainians are already there. No idea how that happened, but I would say they need to prepare to lose Zavetne Bajania, and then Staramlinovka, that red diamond, at 2 o'clock on this map. And then later will be Georgievka, which is in the fortified lines. We'll get there. So Russian command that has some reserves in the south that could be thrown in some counteroffensive, and the last 2 days were the attempts to counteract near Robotina, near Staromayorska. They even reported some successes, but one needs to understand all elegance of this game. The thing is, they are using those few reserves they have, which they cannot really fully use to block all the hot areas, all the advances of Ukraine troops. They only managed to somewhat address 2 of them, but we have 4, and there'll be more. So the front is not crumbling, but it's teetering on that level. And Russian propagandists, in the meantime, are saying how they dropped their resources and countered Ukrainian offensive. And this is usually a good sign that whenever their propagandists become excessively active, it's usually a good sign for us that their defenses are cracking apart. And I think in those usual terms that we like to mention here, 2-3 weeks, you will see interesting developments here. They already are at the limit of their reserves. They're idiots. They're using them not effectively in this operation. Very illiterate way of how they do it. And Ukrainian command is decisively outplaying them on the front line. And in reality, they have about 85% of their reserves already participating in different actions on the front. And when they will lose the rest of it and will not be able to move it, when they will really need them someplace and they will have nothing, and then they'll have to either move troops from other parts of the front. They can probably also dip into Crimea and into the left bank of Dnieper, where they have some. But first of all, there's not too many of those troops, and that will bring upon the weakening of the other parts of the front, which will use them. So Southern Front is being heated up to the right condition, and I think we'll see some sensible results in short historic terms. Different and interesting ones. But as I did mention, they tried to counterattack on Staromayorsky area without much success. On Priyutne, we are going around the fortification line on the northeast. You can see that green protrusion at 11. And also near Rabotina, that blue area at 2 o'clock, we shot today Ka-52. And that tells us that they're using one of their most expensive and rare resources to support their counterattack actions, and they lost. Also, we still have some special operations going around Antonov Bridge. We're still holding that perch. And just as we were starting the show, in Donetsk region, they hit one of our civilian settlements, and we actually, in Pokrovsk, we lost the second in command for the emergency situations in Donetsk region. They initially hit civilian targets there, and then they made a second volley to kill all those rescue workers who arrived to try to help and dig through the rubble. So we lost more people who were trying to help others. This is the typical Russian method, unfortunately, in this war. Also, Olexiy, what about the Chongar Bridge? We saw some destruction there. That was a good hit. And I would say that Genichsk Bridge is probably was hit more successfully, actually, that we should mention, which in this stage increased their transportation route, which in this, I'll be very careful speaking there, a possible weakening of their capacity to counter our advancement near Staromlinovka and Rabotina. I did mention that on the operative level, it's not so important about the meters and yards as about the tempo. And right now, the tempo and rhythm is not in their favor, because right now they need to drop additional reserves there and use more logistics lines, and this is what we've done. We weakened their logistics capacity. It shows again, the Ukrainian command does know what it's doing in regards to isolating the theater of military action. All right, we've been live for about 20 minutes, and we have a few more topics we wanted to cover today. So about military supplies and arms supplies, a big block of questions. Ukraine became the largest recipient of United States arms since the Second World War, That's what was published by Washington Post, analyzing the data by Department of State and military ministry. And Ukraine got about 3 billion worth of military aid. And overall expense was about $23.5 billion. And the United States also took responsibilities to support Ukraine for $18 billion more. And overall, there was also additional $1.5 billion provided to Ukraine for purchases. So the United States overall gave Ukraine 20.6 billion of military aid and 2.5 billions of humanitarian aid. How much do you think? Is it enough, not enough, in light of endless questions about Lend-Lease, etc.? And Lend-Lease is a form, right? We wanted to dig deeper into the actual capacity, actual things being transferred. Is it enough? Is it not enough? How do we gauge that? Mark, let's not talk about Lend-Lease. Let Americans figure it out, Lend-Lease or use other mechanisms. I'll once again say that Lend-Lease is the form allowing the President of the United States to use a certain protocol in the way to support a country during the military, during the war times, during the times when some country is being attacked. So if he decided not to use it, how can we criticize him for not using it when we are the recipient of it? Indeed, the United States supported us with a ton of nomenclature and a lot of aid items, but they have not supplied decisive elements that will be able to actually change the flow of this war. For example, long-range missiles and aviation. So, big thanks to the United States for the military help. If not for that, we probably would not be alive or here. But there are a lot of questions to Americans that I have had and will have. Where are F-16s and where are ATACMS? Which actually is rather funny, the ATACMS part. Even Germans already announced that they're supporting us with Taurus missiles, which have a range of 200 more kilometers than ATACMS. So one would think why Americans are being shy, but still they have it as a part of things to be discussed. French already delivered Scalp missiles, Brits sent us Storm Shadows. Everything flies for those 300 kilometers, same as ATACMS, even further, but we still don't have ATACMS. And we don't have F-16s. Otherwise, big thanks, and we'll be relentlessly saying thank you very much to the United States. So here is another news that United States are approving the first support, the first supply of Abrams tanks to Ukraine. Yeah, true. 30 more tanks. It will not change the flow of war in general. Thank you very much for that. That's a great asset. But as the major element of this war, they will not be able to change the flow. ATACMS and F-16s would have, yes. But otherwise, yeah, we can say that, last week there were 2 more billion afforded to Ukraine. So there's a lot of help coming. This is rather wonderful and amazing aid coming to us. On one hand, it's helping us, it's saving us. On the other hand, it's not allowing us to solve the tasks effectively that we need to solve. So one could say it could be more effective, but this is the logic of American politics, I guess, when they calculate and think long. All right, then next question. We also need to say that the head of Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Kuleba, in his communication with State Secretary of the United States, Antony Blinken, he did mention ATACMS and the need of Ukraine to obtain these missiles, and he was asking for them. So there are more appeals to that supply. I don't know how much Blinken can affect it. It's not exactly his sphere, right? How they make this decision about ATACMS. Well, this decision is made only by President of the United States, so Minister of Foreign Affairs does need to communicate with another minister, but their main prerogative is communication about peaceful aid, and that's international. There are different angles there, so they might touch upon that. Today, Zaluzhny and Milley were talking, and they were discussing military questions as well, so we'll see. Maybe something will transpire out of that meeting. All right. All that hustle around the negotiations. Do you think it'll lead to continuation of consulting and more discussions? United States themselves come out and say that State Department of United States already announced that there are no peace talks with Russia currently, and Moscow doesn't show enough interest in that. How can that statement and that information be related to what we hear in American press about Washington doing some sort of consulting or some sort of negotiations with Moscow, at least through third parties? That's what I think was going on with the visit of Tom Graham to Moscow. I'm not even talking about the head of CIA, Burns, who was meeting and connecting with Naryshkin, his Russian counterpart. Well, Mark, that's understandable. They'll be trying to push us to negotiations. And then it leads to two questions. Will we be pushed enough? Will we agree to do that? And will Moscow decide to sit down and negotiate? And until you get answers to these two, one can exert a lot of effort to trying to create negotiations and start them. Even you and me, if one can imagine some parallel scary reality, can push for that, but it will still be up to Kremlin and up to Kiev to start that. And by the way, it's an interesting angle here, Olexiy, that the Kremlin insists on negotiations, but they're interested more in the process, while Kiev is more interested in the result. Right, Mark. Moscow is interested in leading that situation to some cul-de-sac where it cannot advance anywhere, and then they can try to win on the conditions they want. So that's the term they want. They want to create a situation where they can get some bonuses and they can stop these bonuses from coming to Ukraine. And that's why we do like our allies or our friends who are supporting us militarily and economically and are saying that regardless of Russian position and all, we'll continue supporting Ukraine. And it's interesting to see how this will unfold. One needs to be honest and say, yes, we will be pushed towards negotiations, especially actively after this main phase of counteroffensive. Will be pushed to sit down and talk to Moscow and might even need to start them in some capacity with Moscow. The question is, if our dear friends we're so dependent upon in terms of money and military supplies insist us to sit down and talk, we could, but if it leads to nothing, it leads to nothing. Last autumn, by the way, we were also pushed to negotiate, and Putin, instead of doing that, he escalated and created the winter campaign where he was hitting all of the generators and civilian targets throughout our territory, destroying our infrastructure. And, if Moscow again will disagree to negotiate on the Western terms and will mobilize another 300,000 people, what then? Do you think it's a real scenario? Sure, yeah, it is a very real scenario. And then they probably will get slapped back by the West, saying, well, they're non-negotiable idiots, and Kiev might then get jets faster. That's the usual position of the United States, by the way. They're scaring Moscow with the fact that if you will be misbehaving, we'll supply a ton of weapons to Ukraine. And they're manipulating Ukraine by the amount of supplies. And they say, if we don't like your position, we'll not support you that much. The arguments that are being suggested are strong, but then they're playing an interesting angle and saying that the West is saying some of the people in the West, some of the media is saying that if you listen to that Kissinger plan and all, let's just freeze this conflict in the current territories, and then when Putin dies, you get them back, and maybe you'll save 20 or 30,000 lives of Ukrainian soldiers. And I wouldn't say that it's an acceptable term for Ukraine. I would say that summit in Jeddah is a good proof that our position is shared by most countries in the world, that territorial integrity is still a principle. And once again, so nobody has illusions, we will be pressured to sit down and negotiate with Moscow, but they'll wait and give us an opportunity to finish our counteroffensive campaign. And it's interesting to see what will be afforded to us to continue pushing. And Abrams tanks are already coming. Here's a note I'm reading that I'm reading that Yermak's statement, the head of the presidential office in Ukraine, that there are a couple items that agreement was not reached on about after-war payments. And Mark, I did mention that at the beginning, right? That there are two positions that need more consulting, that they still do not have not come to agreement to the ways of punishing the military criminals and to the amount of reparations. So how do you mean? Well, some countries may object to punishing the upper leadership of Russia for military crimes, and also the matter of reparations. That's another one, because India and China are interested in Russian carbohydrates, and if reparations will be part of the repayment to Ukraine, then China and India may have concerns about how much will they get in this case. Will they have access to Russian resources? So mostly it's related to export from Russia. I think first would be carbohydrates, next would be agriculture items and fertilizers. But this is all solvable. It just needs to be negotiated in details. There are a lot of ways this can be addressed, and these summits are good for that. That's where you can diplomatically address these things and try to provide right conditions for these countries to vote in a certain way. So that's the whole purpose of these summits. Okay, 140,000 are watching us. I want to say that I'm traveling. There is not enough light here. It's normal, and I did mention in my earlier streams that I cannot be carrying huge lamps that I have stationary placed in my studio. Stop flooding in the chat. Olexiy, let me finish it. Please follow the topics of the conversation. Don't go into the superficials of it. Mark, whom did you address that to? To that bot who is trolling you in your chat on purpose? No, Olexiy, there are different people who try to do that. Okay. One more. Roman Pope said that he'll visit Ukraine and he is going to discuss the peace formula. He is making some statements and some noise that he is eager to go and talk, but nothing is happening, right? Mark, maybe something is happening, maybe in the area of exchange of prisoners of war. And I wouldn't drop him off completely off the weights, but any peace initiative is generally good, especially when it's addressing our plan of finishing the war. And humanitarian aspects are very important too, when we're talking about return of prisoners, return of bodies. Yesterday we got 22 people back. Before that we got 40 plus bodies from Russian side. And I think we can say delicately that Vatican might be involved in these processes. I don't know all the kitchen of it, but it's a probable reality. And the return of just one soldier, that's saving somebody's world, so that's important. And we understand that Moscow probably cannot be swayed by Roman Pope, because that's the politics Moscow was doing, aggressive expansionist politics for the last 300 years, so unlikely even Pope can sway them in a different direction. Well, why am I bringing Pope's motion here? I'm thinking they also have another angle of consulting with the Russian church leaders, and I heard before that some of these actions were actually directed at removing the court order to arrest Putin, and they were also working with Russian Orthodox Church on possible return of deported Ukraine kids from the occupied territories back into Ukraine. But and how did it work for them? No, we don't see anything. Well, that's it. That's your answer. I don't think the Pope can change the orders of Hague Tribunal. There are a lot of steps made in this war that are very difficult to play back. Putin managed to insert these four regions into Russian constitution, which is a rather difficult maneuver to take them out. And the West also did a few steps like that court order that are difficult to cancel. But with some political will, of course, there is a probability that they can be resolved, but we'll see. Maybe we'll see a lot of unexpected things in the future. All right, we are at 36 minutes. We have a little bit time left. Peskov was giving an interview to New York Times. I understand it was an exclusive interview, and he talked about a lot of things there. And today, by the way, yeah, I think it's yesterday that it came out, and he mentioned that the publication did present him in a wrong light about 90% of votes that Putin will get in the coming elections. I don't know how they're wrong, because here's the quote. Our elections is not exactly a democracy. It's expensive bureaucracy. Putin will be re-elected next year with more than 90% of votes. And this is the quote that New York Times published. Then from his statement, kind of what I said, but not exactly what I said. The fact that Putin will be re-elected, I am absolutely sure, looking at the date. That's correct. But as for the rest, the question was about elections, and my answer was saying that elections, although an important aspect of democracy, and Putin decided to hold them, but my personal opinion is that they are not important. And they did lie about that in their publication. I don't know how that is a lie, because he basically is making the same statement in different words that New York Times published. And we can see that Putin is going to run for next elections, and he's looking for 90%, right? Why are they so shy? They should have said 116% mark, right? Yeah, right. Why am I bringing this matter up? Is that today Russia, I think, finally has shaped itself with all that previous drift from authoritarian to totalitarianism. And there were several events that happened that transferred it to authoritarian, and now then to the mix of two, and now to totalitarian, because they're limiting the motion, the relocation of their citizens. They're not allowing them to leave the country. This is number one. Especially the ones that still can be conscribed into the army, and now more intensified repressions, which are functional. And that story with Olexiy Navalny, who got 19 more years in prison. And there was Dmitry Gluchovsky, who got 8 years, right? Yeah, that's in absentia. He lives in Paris, as far as I know, but they're trying to put that on him as their revenge. And there was another guy, a technical aide to fund of fighting corruption, Daniil Kholodny, I think. And the thing is remarkable, because he left Russia at the beginning of war, and he's a technical worker. He's not a politician. He's an IT worker. And then he returned back to pick his documents in Russia, and he was captured, and he was given 8 years. 8 years in prison. What it tells us about is that never, ever come back to Russia if you left it, especially if you know that you can be conscribed and you know there are any basis for possible arrest, if they can. So, Putin, why do you think he is going for elections, Alexei? Mark, he's going to legitimize himself again, because unlike Lukashenko, who is not acknowledged by the West as legitimate leader of Belarus, Putin wants to have some sort of elections, even phony as the ones they're talking about, to have a certain official floor that he is a real one. Those elections that were done in Donetsk and Lugansk territories, they actually made it more difficult for the people in the West, and there are a lot of people, there are a lot of useful idiots who are talking now that, oh, but people did express their vote under Russian occupation to join Russia. So he will do that performance and that installation, which is called Elections of President of Russian Federation, that special event. And then there'll be other votes saying why to arrest him according to that Roman statute. He is official president. So there'll be people who will be peddling this angle. He's basically giving an opportunity to those who want to play in his on his side of the field to play with him. And the country that expresses its disagreement by burning of recruitment places. Last week they burned how many? 16 of them? You do need to legitimize oneself. Being in Putin's position, one needs to add more weight to his presence. Yeah, understandably, but in general, that situation is going to some level above institutions where Putin can become an irreplaceable figure. Oh, senior czar? Yeah, not even czar, Olexiy. I think they'll switch to like lifelong or something presidency. Well, Turkmenbashi, Kim Chen In, Lukashenko, all these totalitarian leaders, when under a tiny level of paint, layer of paint, of democratic paint, there is totalitarian evil happening underneath that. If there are still leaders in the West who want to still consider him as if he was an officially elected leader and talk to him as an official leader of Russia, then they shouldn't be surprised that there'll be more escalations coming from Russia and more refugees mixed with Wagner infiltrants and more consequences to such treatment. All right. 162,000 are with us on my channel, 62,000 click the like button. And by the way, I have about 120,000 on my channel. So we got 26k more, by the way. Yeah, good. I still insist on subscribing, sharing links, and see you on Wednesday on the next stream. Tomorrow we'll have other shows. Do not vote, do not like and unsubscribe, right? Yes, of course. See you all.